American dream in Southwest Detroit. A splash of colors as far as the eye can see. Whites, blacks, browns, caramels, every color in between, all melding together.
Right now, I think in Detroit's history, maybe more than other times, I think that we're a city of contrasts. There's a lot of really great things going on, and there's a lot of, really deep struggles. Part of the result of that is that there's a lot of planning processes going on right now, just trying to think about what's going to happen with our city over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, over the next 20 years. So here at the Alley Project, it's an outdoor art environment where people can view, create, or exhibit artwork. We try to use the creative processes involved in that to build relationships. We talk about it in terms of street art. When you use the word graffiti, if I'm talking to a room full of 100 people, to 35 of those people, they might have just heard the word vandalism. But we know that graffiti and vandalism are not mutually exclusive. I think Detroit kind of happens in the same kind of way. When you talk about Detroit, there are two or more, very different Detroits that it brings to people's mind. And so it makes talking about Detroit kind of difficult.
Since its founding in the early 18th century by French settlers, Detroit has seen everything from a thriving fur trade, colonial warfare, and industrial prosperity, to fierce mob activity, municipal corruption, and deadly racial clashes. In 2013, carrying an estimated debt load of $18 billion, Detroit became the largest American city to ever file for Chapter 9 bankruptcy. Detroit's failures became a continental fascination. Doomsday headlines stretched across newspapers. America sought to take in the drama, grasping to understand what had happened to the city. Some blamed Detroit's problems on the loss of manufacturing jobs in Michigan. Others blamed years of bad government. In any case, it seemed there was little hope.
I actually wrote a story that pegged Kilpatrick as a rising star. He was charismatic, young, one of the youngest mayors. Everyone was kind of rooting for him, I think. So in 2000, I went to the Democratic National Convention strictly to do a profile on Kilpatrick. That was sort of a big deal at the time to show this young guy who was in the legislature who might have this huge future ahead in politics.
Darcy McConnell was a reporter for 14 years. She graduated from the University of Michigan, then worked across the state and in Washington, D.C. She was one of the City Hall reporters who helped bring down Detroit's corrupt former mayor. In the fall of 2013, Kwame Kilpatrick was handed a 28-year federal prison sentence. The FBI started investigating Kilpatrick in 2004 and eventually found that he was part of a wide-reaching racketeering conspiracy. His convictions included extortion, bribery, and fraud.
A lot of people felt like I was one of those who was too hard on Kilpatrick in terms of the investigative work that I was doing about him. And I think, again, he could just take over a room. He was just that guy. And I think that there were only a handful of us that probably were looking more intently in terms of what he was doing. Well, I think it just started going downhill. Once the lawsuit was filed, as I always tell people, if people think you're lying, the press corps in particular, then they're going to make it their mission to prove that you're a liar. And it's almost like you've drawn a big bullseye on your back.
McConnell now owns a communications firm in Detroit.
Well, Detroit has always had this stigma that is very old to anybody who's passionate about the city. It gets a bad rap It's always the butt of jokes, locally, nationally. When you travel, people are always asking you, oh my God, how is it there? You know, half of them don't even know we're on an international waterway here. Half of them don't know we have 3 casinos here. They certainly probably don't know we have an ice rink in the middle of downtown. Beyond that there's a viable middle class here. So the stigma is so profound that people are really sensitive and defensive about, don't say bad things about our city. So when you add to that now, you know, one of you who you thought would be your best and brightest in this protracted, I mean, this story stretched out, you know, for years essentially. Most people are just like, let's just move on and get it over with. We're just tired of being stigmatized as this horrible place.
When the 2008 recession hit Detroit, thousands of people fell behind on their property taxes. The city's been plagued by foreclosure and abandoned homes as a result. Deputy Treasurer David Szymanski is at City Hall with his staff to try to help some Detroiters avoid foreclosure.
When people didn't pay their taxes, the taxes get turned over to the Wayne County Treasurer. So rather than being paid to the city of Detroit, they're paid to us. At this point in time, then we make efforts to collect the taxes. And if we can't collect the taxes, we have to foreclose on the property. In most cases, problems that people have is with budgeting. They get a large tax bill twice a year for thousands of dollars, and they can't afford to do that. So one of the things we're doing here today is we're giving people the opportunity to get on monthly payment plans.
Homegrown data startup Loveland Technologies is a small group of university-educated 20-somethings who've put together a project they call Why Don't We Own This? It's a series of interactive maps that visualize Detroit's housing problem. The orange dots are homes that are subject to foreclosure. The red dots are homes that have already been foreclosed on.
The second worst county in the nation that I am aware of had 4,500 properties in foreclosure this year. Here in Wayne County, we could have foreclosed on 92,000 properties this year, but it's simply too much work for our office. So we are foreclosing on 52,000 properties. That's more than 10 times the second worst county that I'm aware of in the nation. We have to collect these taxes to fund essential government services. That's schools for our children, police and fire protection. People want to get their trash collected and they want their street lights to be on. There's little as rewarding as helping somebody save their home from foreclosure. There's nothing as devastating as knowing we simply can't help somebody and they're going to lose their home.
Ingrid Pollock and her family are born and raised in Detroit. She bought her house not knowing the previous owner had let the taxes pile up. Now she has to clean up the mess to avoid losing the home.
The process has been, I can't even describe it. I mean, I've been to every hearing. I've requested help from every organization, you know, offering help, but I don't qualify because I didn't actually own or occupy the property for the years that they want the taxes for. People don't hear about the people who try to help. The man that you spoke to before me, he personally assisted me. My home would have been foreclosed on a year ago if it were not for him and his staff. And they went above and beyond their job to help me, you know, save my property. People don't know that, you know, there are people like him. It's just a camaraderie and a banding together. Every time I go to a meeting, to a hearing, I see people educating each other on where you can get help for this and where you can get help for that, you know. That's never reported by the media.
Danto Furniture it's a local business. It's been here in the neighborhood for years, maybe like 40 years. It's, you know, been a thing where people can call the phone number and tell them about the house, and then they come and board it up. And so I think that what Danto's is doing is a good example of how everybody chips in, you know, to get things done. From the time that you're young, when you grow up here, you're told that to be successful is to leave. My wife is also from this neighborhood. She grew up in a different part of Southwest Detroit. We've made a conscious choice to stay in the community where we grew up. When people found out that we were going to have, you know, children, they started asking us questions like, oh, you know, where are you going to move to? Not are you going to move or when are you going to move or are you thinking about moving, but where are you going to move? Because the underlying assumption is, of course, this isn't a place where you can raise children. My mom grew up in this house, and at some points growing up, I lived here too, at different points, and so my daughter is the fourth generation of our family that's lived in this house.
Eric Howard is the head of Young Nation, a small youth group he created in his neighborhood. He has a master's degree in community development from the University of Detroit Mercy. He also works as a photographer. He founded the Alley Project, or TAP, 10 years ago. Howard and his neighbors took over a vacant lot and turned it into a street art gallery. The alley next to the lot also got a massive cleanup, in addition to a fresh coat of paint. Street art is still paint on the alley's garages, but with permission from the owners. The doors and fences have become permanent, planned works of art.
So we save all of these when they fall off, and there's a local company that was just recently started. It's called Rebel Nell, and they take the old paint and they turn it into jewelry and they sell it. Well, they train young women to make the jewelry and provide fair wages for them. But then the jewelry that they create, when they sell it, proceeds go to benefit local nonprofits. Before we even knew them, we would just keep these because each of these layers are stories, basically. And so what you're looking at right here is all the different layers of paint that's been being put on this garage since 2004 when we started doing stuff back here. And so when you're looking at what looks like one layer, it's actually probably 20. I mean, there's some summers that the garage will get painted twice a day.
So often we've seen portrayals where they actually call Detroit Third World. It's almost like an annual rite of passage that they do this story that I call drive-by reporting. So it takes snippets of other people's reports without talking to any real folks or spending any time balancing that. So yeah, there's no people with any substantive income. That is basically a poor, dirty, crime-ridden city that is barely surviving. And that's not accurate. It's a city with an extremely rich history that's on the water across from Canada that has seen an incredible amount of redevelopment over the last decade or better. And it is full of very proud folks of actually all walks of life. Most people, once they visit Detroit, then they would get that it's something way other than what they've ever perceived or heard it to be. The bankruptcy and the Kilpatrick corruption are really only half the story. When I first came here, there was an old vacant Hudson's building downtown. I asked for a rental guide for places to live in Detroit, and they listed 2 places, Millender Center and Trolley Plaza and Riverfront, 3 places. Now there are a host of places to live downtown. The casinos weren't here. The new home for the Lions weren't here. The ballpark hadn't been here. So there has been an incredible level of development, investment. The population is also growing in parts of the city, Corktown, downtown, Midtown. Young white suburbanites have decided that it's cool to live in the city. They'd rather not be in cookie cutter, so we're getting a more diverse population. We actually have people who will want to move to the city.
Census data shows that the overall population of Detroit went down by 1/4 between 2000 and 2010. But that number was smaller for the downtown area, which only lost 13% of its population. A report by Detroit's Hudson Weber Foundation shows downtown is now on the up. It found that there were a lot more places to live in the city's core. In 2010, there were 26,722 residential units in the downtown area. That's 1,300 more places to live than 10 years before. And rental units aren't sitting empty. The report says that in 2012, occupancy rates in central downtown were 97%.
So the real story is that it's definitely never as bad as it ever portrayed nationally. Definitely not where it needs to be, but incredible progress has been made over the last decade or better.
If you remember the story of the Phoenix rose from the ashes, and that is what Detroit is. Detroit, when you talk to people about their hometown, I very rarely find the spirit that I find in Detroit. People from Detroit, there are a lot of good reasons to leave, but they want to stay here because it is home to them. With Detroit, a lot has gone wrong, a lot has fallen apart, but there's still that indomitable spirit that we're going to make this work. And what's really going on today is my generation, in order to save the city, what we need to do is give it up to your generation.
I've lived in other states and I've noticed that my drive and others, who were from Detroit, we just have this drive, this tenacity about us. It's almost like it's in our DNA, just a drive to push forward and to overcome. I don't know where it comes from, but I do know that it is a characteristic of Detroiters.
We're active and we work to help paint things out, including getting the young people who come to the Alley Project involved and helping to do cleanups and paint outs so that they can understand and build a strong sense of community responsibility. There's ways that you can work with the community, not against the community. And when that happens, you win and the community wins. Here at the Alley Project and in Young Nation in general, we try to measure our success internally by the frequency and depth of unlikely relationships that are formed. People that would not likely be in contact with each other, which would mean resources that would not likely be paired up, with each other, that they have the opportunity to be joined. And so sometimes that's a 15-year-old male from one part of the neighborhood having a relationship with a 15-year-old male from another part of the neighborhood, which maybe, if they're both coming up in street art culture, that relationship might not be likely because maybe they see each other as a threat or as competition, where here we're able to facilitate those things with taking some of the edge off of how that interaction would go if it just happened in the community on its own. The result of all of those unlikely relationships and why we focus on it so much is because it generates social capital. And social capital is how we can sustain the work that we're doing here in the community. It doesn't make it to where street art does not pop up in places that it's not supposed to be. And in fact, it really doesn't even aspire to that. We would like to help reduce the legal and physical risk of young people that are involved or interested in street art because it's a very high-risk door that they're entering the world of art through. The idea is that if we're able to expose them to people that can help them build skills and to start to learn ways to make safer choices, everybody benefits from that, including the broader community.
My people rise up like the sunshine, southwest side, representing that pride. Up, mi gente rise up, down, we hold the hood down. My people rise up like the sunshine, southwest side, representing that pride. Up, mi gente rise up, down, we hold the hood down. Let me tell you the story of a little ghetto boy, dodging hatred through the alley, sticks and stones was his toys. Words never hurt, the frame is titanium, that negative rip trying to get in the cranium. The people cheer him on though.